It's New Year's Eve and we're filling the OTB 2020 Time Capsule here on OTB AM. Up next we're talking rugby and the Irish women's national team and Vera Pauw's charges and their bid for European qualification. To set the scene first, it's rugby. Here's Brian O'Driscoll speaking after Ireland's second loss to England and summing up what's been a largely frustrating year.
What were they actually trying to do that we didn't see?
I'm not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest with you, Joe. It looks different each week. So what is ultimately the answer? That I don't know.
Right. I would interpret that as a little bit damning if you can't see what we're trying to do.
I couldn't properly understand it at the weekend. I also think the quality of passing was a little bit disappointing. You know, guys were stuck inside shoulder. The ball was being shipped on. Bundy and Chris Farrell were doing the very best they could with, you know, bodies with defensive line in their face. I thought Keith Earls, you know, did as best as could be expected with minimal opportunity. But it was quite difficult to see. You know, we hadn't seen it. We didn't see any kind of modifications to some of the tweaks that we saw against Wales the previous week. So I'm not entirely sure, considering the amount of possession that we did have, or what we were trying to do, or where we felt the space was. Yeah.
So this is the next part of our OTB Time Capsule. We're trying to sum up the year that was. That was Brian O'Driscoll, obviously speaking with Joe Malloy at the end of November after another crushing loss for Ireland against England. This is obviously New Year's Eve. We're filling in the 2020 OTB Time Capsule. Adrian Barry has replaced Nathan Murphy. That's happened before, I suspect. Adrian, how are you?
Not too bad. I'm trying to rack my brains as to what that... no, I'm not sure. Generally the other way around, I think, is our rule of thumb. The
2020 Time Capsule is the message and the signals that we would like recorded for posterity. I don't know if you watch Dark on Netflix, but, like, you know, there's lots of multiple realities happening all at the same time. Perhaps ours is the only one that actually matters, but I don't know, maybe what if this is all a dream, Adrian, and actually Ireland are better at rugby than England?
Oh, Jesus, yeah. If only to give us some comfort during these dark winter months. I wish you were right. I think they are better than us anyway, right? Like, I think, but hasn't that always really been the case, given the playing pot, size of the population, the enormity of the game there? It's felt like that's always been the case. It's at the minute it feels like with Ireland that the players are better than the coaching. Now, it's early days in the coaching, so how much you want to write off the coaching ticket, I suppose, needs to be based on that. There definitely needs to be a bit more patience. There aren't too many people like aggressively calling for Andy Farrell's head or for the coaching ticket's heads. But it is always that balance, right? Like, that's the ultimate success or failure of a coaching ticket in any sport. Are they getting the best out of the elements that they have? And you would have to say clearly at the minute with that Irish rugby team, no.
Okay, I'm not actually sure I agree with you. So that's just everybody's picking moments. I got lumped with rugby this year, and my moments are Ireland against England at Twickenham, and you can take your pick between Stockdale's error or Sexton's error. And I was thinking about this. I have a very strong memory at the end, as it was all coming to an end for Roy Keane at Manchester United, the highlights show on a Saturday night. Every week, without fail, there'd be a Roy Keane package picked, and Dunphy would do the voiceover on it. And they went from, like, being the best midfielder in world football to the very end of his career, where his hip was killing him, and he was getting shunted out the door to Celtic because they didn't need him anymore. And I remember one of the packages ultimately being Keane knocking the ball out for a throw-in, and Dunphy going, now, I know it doesn't look like anything, but that's the feverishness, that's the tigerishness. He's doing that because nobody else will do it. It's like he knocked the ball out for a throw-in. It might have been against Sunderland. This was the highlight today, and you're like, we might just be at that point in the Irish rugby cycle where we're going to big teams and we are not good enough because our players are not good enough anymore, Adrian. And no matter about, you could have the greatest coaching ticket of all time, if you put us up against our England counterpits, it's going to be very interesting to see how many Irish players make the Lions match day squad. We might have one or two players in the team, maybe if they get back to form. But who for the Lions would you pick now? James Ryan, maybe. But I think there's loads of good cases for people ahead of him.
I think you're right, and I think that the case for Ryan was a lot stronger before the last time we played England, where the Irish line-out gets dominated, and you look at a player like Mauro Itoje, and people are just saying the captaincy is his to refuse and all that. So I think you're right. And then I suppose after that, there is an element of how well or otherwise the players can perform that's hugely tied in with how they've been coached, right? Like I think it's not to say that they can just offload in the parlance all the responsibility for their performances or their form to the coach, but at the same time it does look like something's wrong there. I think when you break down the sum of the parts in terms of this Irish team at the minute, or where they might be headed, Ger, over the next while, there are a lot of reasons there to be excited about Irish rugby in terms of some of the personnel, and particularly in the pack. I think there are some really exciting players coming through there. Like we were all hoping to see Ryan Baird towards the back end of this year, and then injury denied us that. But even across the back row, some of those Leinster options, particularly, like really strong players coming through there. It's a bit of shuffling going on in the front row, and we don't quite know where that's at. Like, are our pack the most dominant pack in the Six Nations? We're definitely not, and we're getting dominated by England. And are there individual players better than ours at the minute? I would say largely yes. And is their game plan better than us at the minute? I would say largely yes. So it's a difficult one. In a team going backwards, it's very hard to make a case for players getting included in a line squad, as you say. I can't think of many that would make that team.
The general reason for my despair is that the performance that we saw, and it seems like a world away now, and I'm sure people sit and listen to this on New Year's Eve have to chisel off a lot of stuff that's happened between now and then. But that Twickenham game, we were so utterly dominated that actually the scoreboard was too close, as it was in November, in the November internationals. Right. The scoreboard was far too close. England toyed with us and just didn't bother their arses beating us the way they should have and could have. They actually could have killed us. And we were like, oh, it was only a couple of really egregious individual errors. Those individual errors came because the players were spooked by the power of what England were doing. And if that wasn't the case, then you wouldn't be able to point to a history of them doing it to us at Lansdowne Road from the first second, where the overthrown line-out is an explosion and the game is gone straight away. Now, in fairness, we had that ridiculous experiment of playing Henshaw full back that day. But it's from that moment up to this, I've seen nothing that Irish rugby teams have done against English rugby teams that suggests we know a way around this. And the most galling part about all of this, I think, is that Leinster, you hoped, had the coaching ticket and the playing staff to be able to work their way through what was going to happen against Saracens, a depleted Saracens, but they didn't, and they paid for that.
I think the most galling aspect of it all is that there didn't seem to be an attempt to try and do something different against England this year, because let's not brush over the fact that there was multiple occasions in 2019 in which England absolutely slaughtered Ireland. It was in the World Cup warm-up as well. A trend had emerged before Andy Farrell became head coach, where England had bullied Ireland and destroyed them on a number of occasions. This year, you would have liked to have seen them come up with something different. There's a case to be made that Wales have actually had a better year than Ireland have had, because at least they've tried something new. We know that it's wrong. We know that it's wrong, and that it's not going to lead to them having success. But we're sitting in this purgatory at the end of 2020, wondering whether or not we're going about things the right way. If we get back to our 2018 level, can we beat a team like England, is question number one. I don't think the answer to that question is anywhere near a definite yes. So the other way you go about it is, can we come up with something new? In 2020, we haven't come up with anything new. You listen to Brian O'Driscoll and Keith Wood there, they don't even know what they're seeing. So this leads to a very bad and gloomy reflection on the year that was. What I will say, though, is that you're talking about not a lot of Irish players getting into the Lions next year. Who the hell cares? We had all the Irish players in it last time. Well, we had great success in it. We felt like our Irish players were front and centre when it came to that Lions squad. And of course, that spilled over into phenomenal 18 months for Irish rugby thereafter. I think the scars of 2019 are so deep that people will forgive Andy Farrell as long as he gets it right for 2023. And I'm kind of laughing as I say that, because it's a long way away. But these World Cup cycles have become almost a parody of itself, that if he really is working on something which we haven't been able to identify so far, and it comes good over the next couple of years, then all will be well. All is not lost, but it does feel like a wasted year.
I feel like with Andy Farrell, the IRFU must have realised that it was going to take him a little bit of time to adjust to the difficulties and the differentness of being in charge. Every sport, every head coach in every part of the world who stepped up from being a number 2 to a number 1, I think there's probably a few outliers who have managed straight away to seamlessly go, yeah, absolutely, I know exactly what I'm doing here because I've been planning for this. It's like it's the unintended stuff that you have to deal with. It's the HR issues. It's the other bits of the business that were shielded from you, particularly by somebody who was as micromanagement styled as Joe Schmidt, that he's suddenly got to deal with. So that's going to take him a period of time. And I would actually give him the time to do that, because you've decided, the IRFU have decided, that they saw something in him that they felt that was worth keeping on board. And you would have to assume that they're going to give him that time. And so it looks like, almost irrespective of what happens, like he's going to be our coach heading into the next World Cup. In which case, I know we've talked with Alan Quinn on the show before about how important the Six Nations is. Like, if he was to come out and say, actually, you know what, I need to blood a lot of players, and I need to get a lot of players quickly to see if they have what it takes to play at test level, because we don't have depth. Every time players get injured, everybody goes, oh, we can't win that game because there's 4 players injured. It's like, you're always going to have 4 players injured. It's international rugby. 4 of your best players will always be injured. That's just the rules of the game. You can't pick which 4. You don't know how long they're going to be out for, but the attritional rate of international rugby. So I feel like you have to double down on the Andy Farrell experiment. And actually, there's a year of what Wales are going through, probably this year, ahead of us. And it's this time next year where you're going, OK, what's your first team?
Yeah, I think even on that, Ger, like, I think that, and the Georgia game is so long ago now, don't ask me to name the starting 15, but that was a head scratcher for me on that basis of blooding new players and having a look at new talent and giving, you know, the thing that Stuart Lancaster always talks about, the spread of caps, like giving more caps to players who don't have them, to get them up to speed and to get the group further along that track of cumulative caps. So, like, why are we starting Conor Murray in that Georgia game, for example? Or I know James Ryan maybe needs to try captaincy, but maybe he shouldn't be in there. Like, why aren't we looking at Craig Casey or looking at, like, I mean, Ross Byrne, fair enough. You could also make a case for some, maybe even for his brother or some of the other outcasts to have a look at them. It felt like a bit of a, I mean, as it turned out, it was such a dire, desperate game anyway on every front. Hindsight looks great, but I would have been saying that before the game, that why not just use that game? It's a shot to, we're going to beat them whatever happens. Put out your B team and have a look at a bunch of players. That was slightly concerning for me. And there was a load of little system errors that I ultimately, you're right, if we limp through the next Six Nations and the following autumn's tests or whatever way the calendar is going to look over the next couple of years, I think you're right. He is going to remain the head coach heading into the World Cup. And like we've often said, should we stop looking at the Six Nations as the most important thing, and then it might pay dividends in the World Cup. But at the minute, there seems to be so many small system errors, like Hugo Keenan one that jumped out for me from the Autumn Cup Series Nations, whatever it's called. Hugo Keenan standing at first receiver, and I know, look, it's a one-off thing and you can say a player standing in the wrong position, but he's standing at first receiver with Ireland about 5 metres out from the Welsh line. And needless to say, he gets swallowed up by the Welsh pack and the ball gets turned over. It's such a basic...
Oh, but presumably that was on purpose, no?
Rugby. You just don't see it happen. What's that?
Presumably that's on purpose. Like, they want to get him... Is that not a good sign?
You don't see a player of his build stood in that position with the bears of the Welsh pack ready to eat him alive, you know?
I don't know. Like, do you know, obviously you're connected to the team various ways, do you know that wasn't a planned move?
I would be, I don't know on the slightest, but I would be astonished if it was a planned move.
I'd say that they're trying to get the ball in Hugo Keenan's hands as much as possible. Stuff like that.
Yeah. But out wide somewhere, Ger, like in there, it's got to be one of your props, or it's got to be one of your back row. Like, that's, you're heading into the teeth of war there. That's not as somebody of Hugo Keenan's build. It really stood out for me at the time. I hadn't heard anything from within the camp, nor am I that well connected, but it just stood out like a sore thumb.
Your philosophy and Andy Farrell's philosophies are at odds, it turns out.
Listen,
I do.
Point you're making.
I do wonder as well if there's a little bit of the Irish sports fan projecting onto the Irish rugby team a little bit. Like we spoke about Stephen Kenny earlier on and the fortunes of the football team. It's a year of upheaval for Irish sport, for Ireland's main 2 international teams. And I wonder if the overhaul that we've seen on the football front, part of our consciousness is saying, well, we must see this on the rugby front soon, ignoring the fact that we're coming from a spell, a very, very bad spell in football that's gone on for a hell of a lot longer than the spell has gone on for rugby, that I wouldn't be surprised if there's a part of Andy Farrell thinking to himself that success for him would be to turn the clock back a little bit, to get back to where this team and a lot of these players were at their peak. And maybe the idea of an overhaul just isn't appetizing to him whatsoever. He feels that the best outcome has already been seen by this team, and it's just about rediscovering that.
Except that would involve having World Player of the Year Johnny Sexton, as opposed to Johnny Sexton 2 years down the line. With the way that aging works, that's unlikely to happen. You know, that 2018 team, that's never going to happen again.
The biggest hope. Sorry.
Go on.
Well, the biggest hope for 2021, you're right, is that Joey Carberry comes back fully fit and doesn't get injured ever again, which is obviously not going to happen. But if he can put together a matter of months, puts together a full Six Nations campaign, puts together even like just a spell of weeks in a green Ireland jersey, whether it's in November, whether it's in the Six Nations, and just show us again why he can be that number 10, I think we'll be in a lot better place next year. You don't want to distill it down to one player, but the Sexton factor has been massive. It's unavoidable that he was going to go over the crest of his mountain after winning that World Player of the Year, because he won it at such a late age. And it's frustrating in Carberry that we've seen so many amazing moments, even in his short career at Munster, we've seen some outrageous stuff, that he is constantly crocked. That if we can have one wish granted in 2021, it will be a clean bill of health for just him.
Yeah, and look, that would be absolutely amazing. I think we would all benefit from that. The one thing you would wonder is, though, that how will they find room for him in the team? Have we seen enough from Mike Catt and from Andy Farrell, who has essentially picked the 4 available centres whenever they're fit, and there's been no experimentation there. There's been no sense that actually we will try and get a second playmaker in at 12. We will try and play somebody who's a second out half, even for 10 or 15 minutes. Like, that might have been an interesting experiment to see at some point. Pick Sexton at 10, or pick Billy Burns at 10 and put Sexton in at 12, and see if we can get another couple of years out of Sexton. Like, they are clearly open to lateral thinking when you think about the fact that they moved a tight head to loose head, and he played an international rugby match there for the first time, which was like definitely outside the box thinking, lads. Might have been interesting to see him play like a season there for his club. If only you controlled the club and could tell them what to do. So I don't know. It feels a little bit like they're juggling a lot of plates, and some of the plates are collateral damage.
Would we be having a different conversation if Leinster had gone and won? I mean, if and buts and all that. But if Leinster had won the Heineken Cup, would we be saying that actually Irish rugby is in good health?
Yeah,
I think. And so are we catastrophising slightly because look, they did, and they were knocked out, not hugely comprehensively, not in the same way of an Ireland-England game, but like they were beaten them.
Sorry, hang on a second. The philosophy underpinning Saracens' victory against Leinster is the same philosophy that underpins the England team beating Ireland. That's why it's not catastrophising, it's seeing that link. And it's happened to Leinster 2 seasons in a row. So, as go Leinster, go Ireland, essentially at the moment. If Leinster had come up with a way to outthink Saracens, then Ireland would have copied that template. But the brightest minds in Irish rugby, which at the moment seem to be Leinster's, have been so far unable to use their talent to get around Saracens.
Just on that is, you're right, but that is not what we should be. That's not the situation we should be dealing with. Again, if I can add a second thing onto my list of wishes for Irish rugby in 2021, is that the over-reliance on Leinster, not only from a playing standpoint, but from a coaching and thinking standpoint, ends, and that the great coaching ticket that they supposedly have lined up at Munster comes good, and I don't know, they finally win the Champions Cup semi-final. Even saying that seems outlandish at this point, given last season. That they might actually beat Leinster in a game, in a big game in 2021, maybe go all the way in Europe. These are the things we want to see from this Munster team, from this coaching ticket. And then all of a sudden you have 2 different things to judge, I don't know, a match against Saracens by. If Munster come up against them, then you're like, so this is how Stephen Larkham thought about that game. That's how Stuart Lancaster thought about that game. What can we take from that? And we have players from both of these provinces. Of course, it goes for Connacht and Ulster as well.
Yeah.
But really, from a 2020 standpoint, Munster have been a disappointing part of it.
Okay, so our time capsule is Munster not even part of the conversation about the future of Irish rugby at the moment. We are injury-ridden and we have no plans. That's what we would like the signals going into the future. When somebody looks back on this short segment, they'd be like, wow, that was pretty grim, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It'll open in 2023 when we've won the World Cup.
Yeah, and look, our crystal ball section That's a different show, folks. This is our time capsule. This is ending 2020 as you all thought it would end, in darkness and tears. Last point on rugby, anybody? No?
I just like the only thing I'd say is that look, it definitely does feel as if we're having a very sort of down conversation about Irish rugby, and that just feels where we're at the minute. It's possible, of course, anything is possible that all gets turned around in the 2021 Six Nations. It doesn't look likely at the minute.
No, it absolutely. There's no evidence. Where's your evidence for that? Where's your evidence for that? Well, that's just my opinion. Well, OTB AM is brought